Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the City Council Special Joint Meeting with the Planning Commission and the City Council for September 14th, 2015. We could have the roll call, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Slater?
Here.
Councilmember Campbell?
Here.
Councilmember Gottlieb?
Here.
Councilmember Henderson?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
Councilmember Pennington? Councilmember Teets?
Here.
Chairman Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Abhidian?
Here.
Ms. Cruz?
Here.
Mr. Favor?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Ms. Kuba?
Here.
Mr. Sanzika?
Here.
Mr. Tago?
Here.
Ms. Burko?
That's a student.
Is that a student
Yes.
rep?
For yours? For yours. I did get a phone call from Councilman Pennington, and he's making his way through traffic and should be here shortly. So we will have him shortly. Just a couple of house cleaning items before we get going. Don and I tried to get these joint meetings together. We'd like more than we do, but we've always felt that this was a great way for the City Council to get to know the Planning Commission and for the Planning Commission to get to know Council. So when we have issues that we think need further discussion between the two of us, we're going to have more of these, which I think is a good idea. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for those that are going to do the presentations. We do have several presentations, and we have a pretty good docket for an hour. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers to try to give their presentation in 10 minutes, because actually the most important part for this panel is the discussion and what we're going to do, next steps. But there will be some time for questions and answers too. So with that, I'm going to turn this meeting over to City Manager Brian Kishnick, who is going to handle the introductions and moving us through C1 through 7. Good evening, Brian.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council, and Planning Commission. I think the last time we were here as a joint meeting, we talked about the master plan. So at the request of the mayor and the Planning Commission Chair, Mr. Edmonds, we are prepared to give you a 3-minute update on the master plan. And as you said, because in the name of time, and then as you said, we will have another joint meeting scheduled, we think, October, November, and that will be narrowly focused on the master plan as well, so that we continue to be together. So with that, I'm going to ask Dick Carlisle to give a brief update on the master plan. Thank you.
Good to see everybody tonight. Looking forward to meeting the new planning commissioners when I have an opportunity. We have been working on the master plan. This is an update from the 2008 extensive review of the master plan. Started this a couple of years ago, and one of the important parts of this were to conduct a number of more targeted public engagement meetings, which we've done. These were done, it took extensive amount of organization and time, I think, and that's probably what is why we have taken this amount of time with the master plan, because these were all very specialized forums. We started out with a real estate forum. We had a great attendance there, over 75 people. We had a high school forum with the high school students, representative of the high schools, 20 were in attendance there. We had the Boomers and Shakers Forum, which was just the last one. If you had an opportunity to attend that, I know, Don, you were there. It was really a great session. We had well over 75, if not more, people there, and a lot of really good input. And I think the Planning Commission either has seen or will see very shortly the summary of that. We had the Neighborhood Forum, which was, I think, approximately 20, 30 people. Yeah, probably. And then the Big Beaver Transportation Symposium, and that, of course, was held out through an entire day and evening, and we probably had close to 100 people involved in that. So, you know, in response to our desire of council and the Planning Commission, we really were able to get a lot of extensive public engagement. We're very much targeted in these areas to be able to draft specific sections of the master plan, which the Planning Commission has reviewed in a draft form. So moving forward, quick.
I was moving you along.
I know. So the final draft of the master plan will be to the planning commission in early October. We want to give the commission ample opportunity to review that. Then we are planning on a joint meeting with the planning commission and the city council, because we will be asking the city council to approve the plan for distribution. By law, we have to distribute the plan for public review. It has to go out for a 63-day review period. Don't ask me why it's 63 days. And then it's after that 63-day review period, the planning commission will hold a formal public hearing, because at that point in time, we will ostensibly have comment from the surrounding communities and from the county. And then finally, we will ask the planning commission to recommend approval to the city council, and then ultimately the city council to adopt the master plan. That's the process we had laid out to follow, and that's the process that we will see going forward. So by early part of next year, we will have fully updated the master plan. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Dick.
Thank you.
Very good stuff. We were all wondering where we were going. That clears it up for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to call on Planning Director Brent Savanon as we move into this gas and oil and minerals discussion, and the fact that the Planning Commission has done a lot of work on the ordinance in terms of that. And Brent is going to give a great 30-second summary on what's happened to this point. And so I'll just say right now, in council, when it came to a discussion with council, we never went to the table, but just considering it internally, we thought, this is a great time to bring everyone together, so.
30 seconds, I should have had an espresso before the meeting. So as we all know, this item was initiated by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission recognized that the zoning ordinance that we have today is presently silent on oil and gas facilities. So what they tried to do was the intent of this was to strike a balance between protecting residents and property owners from secondary impacts of potential of oil and gas facilities, but also providing reasonable standards that oil and gas facilities could be developed in the city of Troy. So these provisions would regulate oil and gas facilities, including hydraulic fracking. So in terms of a very, very brief summary, I think I got 10 seconds left. The text amendment proposes that oil and gas facilities be prohibited in the IB district by special use, would require minimum lot size of 5 acres, would require increased setbacks based on adjacent uses and zoning, and there'd be some strict performance standards that would be associated with these facilities. Any questions?
So in terms of framing the issue and why we're here, I think we've covered that. But what actually happened, and I'm going to ask Brent while we're talking, move that screen, write those things down, because it does get a little comparing apples to apples, apples to oranges to see where we are. So framing the issue, there was a lot of information that came at the city council members and staff on what is fracking, what's involved in the fracking process, what about fracking in Oakland County, what about Rochester Hills. So Brent, those last three things, 5 acres, IB, those three factors, just write those down in terms of with a heading called PC proposed, right? Is that correct, Mr. Chairman? Okay. So we've asked 3 speakers to come, and we're going to start with Hal Fitch, who's the director of the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals at the NDEQ. He's going to provide the first presentation in 10 minutes and information. So Hal, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, first of all. We have about 60 people in our organization, Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals. We regulate primarily, about 90-95% of our work is regulation of the oil and gas industry. We also do mining regulation and oversight. But we've got some very strict, comprehensive rules. Among our staff, we've got geologists, petroleum engineers, attorneys, member support staff, with some real extensive expertise in oil and gas development. We cover oil and gas drilling and production and site restoration right from cradle to grave, virtually every aspect of it. Well location, the construction of the wells, operation of the wells, plugging, and site abandonment restoration. We have to, our big goal probably, I would say, is to balance property rights, in other words, the rights of the mineral owners, and the companies that lease those mineral rights get the right to develop them, with environmental protection, protection against, or protection of adjacent landowners, and protection of our air, water, and soils. We have, for instance, we have setbacks in place. We have 450-foot setback from residences, some of the highest of any of the states. I think there are 2 states that have longer setbacks, Colorado and Wyoming, and they have provision for exceptions where you're not able to attain that kind of setback distance. Setback is important because if you impose too large a setback distance, it essentially becomes prohibitive of oil and gas development, and then you are potentially impacting the rights of those mineral owners. We've got a very safe history. If you go back, I like to talk about our modern era of regulation going back to the 1980s. We've had 14,000 oil and gas wells drilled in that period. We haven't had one instance of contamination of a water well or surface water from any of those 14,000 wells. So we think we've got a pretty good safety record. The impacts, the big impact really from oil and gas development is the drilling phase. It takes typically in the kind of wells they'd be interested in this part of the state, it typically takes about maybe 3 weeks to drill. It's a pretty intensive process. They operate around the clock, not just for economical reasons, but for protection, environmental protection. You have to keep that whole operational so that you can control any influx of fluids or anything into it. So, but there's truck traffic, there's diesel engines running that rig, but it is a short-term operation. After that, the well's either plugged if it's uneconomic, or it's plugged eventually at the end of its life. So it may have a productive interval of maybe 20 years, typically 30 years, sometimes longer. The production aspect of oil and gas development, we don't get complaints on, generally speaking. We've got a pretty good handle on everything, including odors. Some of the older operations, we used to get some more odor complaints. EPA just enacted some new regulations on odors. We've got an infrared camera that we can go out and detect releases, and got some pretty tight controls on that. So we think we've got a pretty good handle on the environmental impacts. What we've been hearing recently is there has been an increase in concern over drilling in residential areas or more heavily developed areas. In response to that, we issued a Supervisor Wells order that does a number of things. It requires notice to residents and local government, requires an evaluation of alternative well sites, berming, screening, fencing, noise reduction, light shielding, restriction on trucking hours, and a number of other safeguards in areas that are more heavily developed. So we've got some special restrictions just in those areas of the state. We've had about 1,800, more than 1,800 wells drilled within cities or villages historically in Michigan. There's one right here in Troy, MSU, on the MSU property. About 66 wells in 14 cities in Oakland County. So let me talk about property rights a little bit. In zoning, you can say, well, you can't have a gas station in this district, or you can't have a dry cleaner here, or manufacturing's got to go in industrial. The owners or operators of those kind of operations have some latitude on where they place those kind of facilities. It's not the case with minerals. Oil and gas are where nature put them, and you can drill from some distance away, but there's a limit how far away you can go and still tap that resource. So these courts have found that those mineral rights are a distinct right. They have to be honored under the Constitution. So that's where the balancing comes in. And that's, again, that gets back to what one of our primary missions are, or is. I can tell you from our experience as a state agency, this predates me, but back in 1991, we had a case with an operator called Miller Brothers over in Nordhaus Dunes. They had leased the rights to develop oil and gas on the property. The surface was actually Forest Service surface. The DNR at the time, of which I was part at that period, denied any capability to drill or extract that oil and gas. we ended up with a sizable settlement liability as a result of that. The courts found there was a taking of those property rights, and the state ended up paying a $90 million settlement suit. So you kind of have to be mindful of that. Looking at your proposed ordinance, I see a lot of good common sense things in there. I do think you have a potential problem with property rights taken. Because if you, for one thing, well, one provision is you have to be 100 feet back, setback from the property line. Property lines are not so meaningful in oil and gas development because an operator, unless a company has to lease a large tract, you've got to have at least 40 acres under lease or under their control before they can drill. So those internal property lines within that 40 are not as relevant as they might be if you're building a some kind of a structure on the surface or something. All those rights get pooled. So the other problem I see with the ordinance, I think it would restrict drilling to just a scattering of tracks along the southern part of the city. Even with directional drilling, if you could directionally drill, that would put most of the city, most of the oil and gas, if there whatever oil and gas there may be in the city, put it out of reach. So I would encourage you to take a look at that to see if that might incur some liability for a property takings issue. The other thing is you can do a lot with directional drilling. As I said, you can reach out. We've had a 2-mile long horizontal. In Michigan, I think it's about the record. I think the world record is about 7 or 8 miles. But the way the ordinance is structured, in the subsurface, you can't even encroach on those property tracts. So you're pretty much limited, but under the ordinance, you'd be pretty much limited to just a vertical hole on those tracts where it would be allowed. So I'd be glad to talk in more detail about those things. I hear hydraulic fracturing mentioned a lot. Hydraulic fracturing probably is not really an issue in this part of the state. The kind of reservoirs that the operators are looking for don't lend themselves to hydraulic fracturing. But I could talk for a half hour or more on hydraulic fracturing. It does have a safe history in Michigan, despite what you may have heard. We've had, and even the high volume hydraulic fracturing operations, we've had 80 of those in our history, and we've never had a problem with hydraulic fracturing. So the problems that you're going to have, the risks, are from surface spills, things like that. Anyway, that's kind of my story in a nutshell, and I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Why don't we do the presentations first and then try and save our questions for after this?
So Al, can you help us, or Brent's gonna, MDQ, he's gonna put, what's the minimum acreage you require?
Well, we require a 300-foot setback from residences or water wells, so what's that equate to? I think it's about several acres, 4 or 5 acres. I'd do the math again.
So there's no specific area requirement?
There's not a tract requirement. Well, you have to have 40 acres under lease or under control. And that's in other words, you designate at least a 40-acre parcel. That's the size of a reservoir that could be tapped or efficiently developed by one well. But as far as the surface tract, we don't really have any.
Just put ours, we'll, 500 feet from a residential zone property line, right? Al, thank you.
Yeah, ours is 450 from a residence, not from property line.
Exactly. But we're trying to, I said, it's hard to compare apples to apples and apples to oranges, and it's hard to, but that's why we're writing it down. So Hal, thank you. Now we're going to ask the County Water Resource Commissioner, Jim Nash, to give his presentation. Jim, thanks for coming.
I absolutely appreciate you guys inviting me. It means a lot. I read this when you sent it to me, and I just scanned it over again. I think this is a very good effort at limiting it, while still allowing it. I think it's a very good idea that you set this into stone, especially since you really had no policy before. So I think it's very good. As Hal said, there's a couple of issues you might end up having. When you limit it too much in terms of where you're going to allow the actual drilling, my city, Farmington Hills, back in 2001, a company wanted to come in and put a whole bunch of wells right along the side of a housing development right on 275. the city had questions about it. The company basically didn't cooperate in terms of getting information about how the operation would go and how it would work. They eventually, the city said they wouldn't allow it. They were sued, they ended up losing in court to property rights. They ended up having to pay a $800,000 settlement. $600,000 was paid by insurance, the other $200,000 the city had to come up with. At that point, they were satisfied with that, they just didn't want to see that development happen there. So, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Right now, a lot of communities, there's no funding to be able to do that kind of thing. People are just desperate for funding, so they're looking for ways to bring in money. This is one way to do that. I would suggest that, you call a group called Flow for Water. It's called flowforwater.org. It's a very good group. They help local governments develop policies that will hold up in court, that will stand up to court challenges in terms of protecting their environment, their spaces. They're very good at that. They've helped a lot of communities do that. I suggest to call them. Jim Olson is the guy that runs that. What you're trying to do is very positive. I think it's a great idea. The biggest objection I've seen in Oakland County and in Macomb County is having these rigs right alongside developments, right alongside homes. The big issue for them is, as Hal just mentioned briefly, is air quality. There's air quality issues around wherever you're drilling. If it's an actual drilling rig, that's where the most air problems come. But even regular pipes sitting in the ground, they'll leak. There's signs that say don't smoke near there. There's a reason for that, because they're leaking gas. As Hal mentioned, the president just announced that EPA is going to be going after these leaking systems in the supply chain, from the actual drill to the tanks to the shipments, to make sure that this is all tight. A few years ago, Colorado became the first state to do that, and they said in Colorado that if they eliminated all the leaks in the system, in the supply chain from what they drill, that would be the equivalent of taking all the motor vehicles off their highways, just in the amount of leakage in that system. They do a lot more drilling than we do here. So you have to make sure that you're protecting the air quality right around those things. When you're doing it in an industrial area, when you're making sure it's separated from residential areas, that's the best way, in my mind, to make sure that you're limiting the exposure to these kind of air quality problems around drilling. One of the things that I would very much encourage you to do is, whenever you're developing, I think part of this is when they're giving you their plan for drilling, you're going to be demanding that they show you how they're going to limit potential water problems, leakage into the system. If there's some kind of leak in the actual drill itself, I would make sure that you include any kind of development of a site. They have to make sure that they do wells, test wells, to make sure what the quality of the water is before they do any kind of drilling. And I would encourage, at least in the first while, to do some testing afterwards. After they've done their drill, they've done all their processing, and it's just a small system that is in place. I'd go ahead and once in a while check the groundwater around those areas, just to make sure that things are not having a problem, and even check the wildlife and the open water in that area, just to make sure that there's not going to be a problem. I'm not totally against any kind of drilling, as long as it's done in a safe manner and it takes into account the local population as much as it can. We need to, again, clean air around these sites is very, very important. Hopefully the EPA is going to start making that much more enforced, and I think that would, again, everything that's leaking is something that we'll not be able to use in the system, for our furnaces or our stoves. So anything that's waste, is they have to realize over time that the more they can cut off the waste, the more they'll save money in the long term, because they'll have more gas to sell. But in terms of what you're doing here, I think it's a very good idea. As Hal said, you might end up having some issues with if you're limiting it so much that they can't get to some sites that they could potentially have. There's ways around that. Again, I talked to Flow for Water. They can help you with that, to do that. You do, by doing this, you're accepting responsibility for it, and I think that's a very good idea. You're more limited in the actual drill operation in terms of limiting where it can go. But in terms of tank farms and piping and all those things, you have a lot of power to make sure that that's done in a way that's not going to harm your city. And I would make sure you keep on that. And I love the idea of having the fence around it and then trees around that, and then, so it's not going to be, eyesore, people won't see it. That's a really good idea. I think that's great. And again, that makes sure it's farther away from people, because the closer you are, the more intense, whatever atmospheric problems you might have, and the farther away you get, you're less inclined to be affected by it. So, again, the more you can do it away from actual people in their homes, the better it is. And it's true that there's doing better with odor control and things like that, but there still is issues with that, and I've had complaints in Oakland County of people who smell that stuff going on near their homes when there's an operation going on. So just make sure that you're doing as much as you can to limit that, and that's very, very important. And again, you guys taking hold of this issue and really thinking it out, I think that's fantastic. It's what all our communities should be doing. We really need to be doing this. So we're having it in an organized way that we can get what we need. People have the property rights they have that they want, but we're doing it in a way that's not going to impact the long-term well-being of your community. Water quality and air quality are the two biggest issues I have, and as long as you're doing this, you're heading in the right direction. So I appreciate you guys having me tonight, and I'll answer questions when we're done. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, the last speaker is John Griffin, who, will give a handout, who provided some information, and a lot of information came into the council, or to me, that went to the council in Brent. And so we asked John to come speak and give us some facts that he might have and answer questions. So go ahead, John.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to be less than 10 minutes. We have a lot of time to talk about. I'm glad Halfitch talked about the regulations. He's well versed in these among regulations. Is probably the most credible source in the state. When it comes from him, it would mean a lot more than when it comes from me. I understand that. I work for American Petroleum Institute in Lansing. I work on state issues for API. I'm a Michigan resident, former city council member in the city of Jackson. So I'm a local. Jim Nash and I have been on many forums. Some of them were the forums we hosted. We were on TV together one Sunday morning on Fox 2 News. So Jim and I are no strangers. Why have I been showing up in Troy? It's the fourth time I've been here since this oil and gas ordinance was proposed, and what concerns do we have? These kind of issues are being debated in hundreds of communities around the country, and several here in the state of Michigan as well. And some of them for different reasons. Sometimes oil and gas leasing's new to an area, lack of understanding of what happens and occurs, gets people all concerned. Sometimes they're addressed. Public forums, the oil and gas producer might come and do a presentation or work with the local residents. Sometimes not. Sometimes there's just cases where people don't want oil and gas drilling, period. We're running into that quite a bit. Sometimes the initiative is because neighboring communities are passing ordinances. It's happening here. Rochester Hills was mentioned earlier in some of the presentations. Shelby Township popping up in Oakland County quite a bit. It's been a topic of discussion, and I think part of that is to Jim Nash's credit. And then sometimes the impetus for local action is being prompted by outreach and organized campaign of environmental groups. Many of these groups are statewide organizations, but they're funded with some national money. The biggest funder of these environmental groups against fossil energy is the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, grandsons of John D. Rockefeller. One of the groups that's being funded, FLOW, funded by the Park Foundation, that Jim mentioned, out of New York. So, and then, hey, I'm funded out of a national organization to advocate on behalf of the oil and gas industry. We're going out trying to get the facts straight. It's easy to criticize us in 30 seconds. It takes about 30 minutes to explain exactly what's going on there. But anyway, these end up, these national issues as far as oil and gas, climate change, Keystone XL, and all those things. It's a big national debate, and it's what kind of direction we can have as far as an energy future. Many of these organizations are now going to local jurisdictions to try and get bans passed, moratoriums, regulations to really restrict oil and gas development. So that's going on a lot in Michigan. So that's why I'm here, because it's really focused in on the local levels, and that's where the environmental groups are. Hal mentioned this before. Why do I think it's a bad idea for local units to dive into regulation of oil and gas development? The resources underground don't recognize the boundaries up above. And, well, every community says, well, we're just one little community and we're residential or we're not residential, but we really wouldn't have that much impact and there's not a lot of drilling going on. If a critical mass of local organizations pass these kind of things, we will have de facto bans. And there is a drive out there to try and make it so difficult that producers just give up. We've seen it, and it's part of the goals of some of the organizations. So it is important to look at it from the bigger picture, not just from your local unit of government. Now, we all use energy every day. I mean, we all drove cars here probably. The natural gas well at the MSU facility has been in operation since 2001. It's produced 7.7 million MCF, that's 1,000 cubic feet, that's how it's measured on your bill, in those 11 years. Now, that's about roughly 104,000 homes were heated for 1 year at that level of natural gas production. And then 213,000 barrels of natural gas liquids. We get propane from that. Natural gas liquids can also be put in the crude stream to make gasoline. So they're very valuable products that we all use every day. And the MSU facility, under this proposal, would not be able to be developed. My guess is almost every house in the city of Troy uses natural gas for heating. And that's a pipeline running into every building. If you back through that pipe somewhere, it goes to a well, it's connected. We want the gas. If we want to have it, we have to have wells, we have to have it somewhere. If every community decided that we're going to ban oil and gas development, the whole system would freeze, and transportation would dry up. The red and green map was mentioned as far as where the no-go areas are. I'm not an attorney, but boy, that does look pretty restricted. Even Jim Nash, when he commented on it, that means I'm probably, and Hal and Jim agree on something. How's that? Probably right. It was mentioned that mineral rights owners have property rights too. And he mentioned Farmington Hills. I was going to talk about that. We have in draft form, I was hoping to have it ready by now, by the Micah Myers Law Firm. They do a lot of work for the oil and gas industry and for local governments too. They're based in Grand Rapids. They happen to be the plaintiff's attorney in the Farmington Hills case and in the Nordhaus Dune case. We're having them draft a legal opinion for the legislature and for local governments. We want to get that stuff out there. We want to have them get proper information so they don't step into an area where they might get into some legal risk. In closing, the state has very stringent regulations. We're recognized as being some of the toughest in the nation. They've gone through audits with the Groundwater Protection Council, the IOGCC, Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission as being some of the best in the country, most protected. Energy systems and the transportation network that we use cover states, regions, and sometimes entire nations. And they have to be looked at in that kind of scope. They have to be consistent and extend across large geographic areas. So if we have local governments passing their patchwork of regulations, it would provide harm to the customer, because ultimately those costs have to be passed on and people have to get service. So thanks for listening. I'll be glad to take questions. And the handout. Okay. It's fresh off the press, our latest edition. That comes from the Energy Information Administration. It's the statistical arm of the Department of Energy, USDOE. Their analysts predict right now we use oil and natural gas 2013 is 63.4% of our total energy mix in the country. EIA says by 2040 we're going to be at 61.6. Renewables will be at about 10. So we're still going to need oil and natural gas for some time. And that's why we're out there trying to promote safe and responsible statewide regulation. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Mr. Mayor, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sure there are questions that we have for our speakers today, so why don't we try to be organized and go around the table. If you have a specific question for one of the speakers or staff or the city attorney, Don, you have your hand up first, so why don't we go this way? And if you have a question that you would like to ask to one of the presenters tonight, why don't we do that first, and then we'll have a discussion.
Well, I'd just like to ask any one of the presenters, what is your assessment of the ordinances that have been already enacted in neighboring towns? Are they in jeopardy of being sued too? I like an honest opinion.
I have
We are recording this, so if you could, if you're going to speak, please stand up and...
Yeah, okay, thanks. You know, I haven't reviewed all of them in detail, so I guess I couldn't say absolutely. I have seen some that are pretty prescriptive, and you really have to look at the geography and the specifics of the ordinance and you know, what parcels are actually impacted. But if you don't, if you have something that prohibits development in large areas, and particularly I think like the draft ordinance you have here, it doesn't even allow you to cross boundary lines in the subsurface, you're denying the ability to develop some of those minerals.
Thank you.
And I guess if there's a speaker that has a rebuttal to that position, we would welcome that. And if there isn't a rebuttal, I guess we'll tacitly, you agree with his point of view, then I would say.
There's always a risk of a lawsuit, and again, there's been, I'm not that familiar, I know that West Bloomfield has a moratorium, although I think that's about to come up again. I'm not that sure about the other communities, I haven't heard any, nobody's come to me with specific regulations for their own community that I've heard of. If anybody comes up with that, I'd love to hear about it, but again, Flow for Water has a really good background in that. They don't want to ban it. They just want to give you chances to mitigate it as much as you can, the damages caused, all the traffic, you know, the various things that can be done. Again, as I said, you're probably your most potential for losing a lawsuit would be limiting it as much as you have. But again, I see the best way of doing it is putting it in an industrialized place where you already have this kind of thing going on. So if it's one of those things that I would suggest asking Flow for Water or some of the other groups around here that work on that. But again, they've done a lot of work with local communities to do that. So that's a really good organization to talk to about specifics on how to work with these kind of things.
Could I add something to that? I would encourage the city, if you're going to go with something suggested by Flow, that you'd ask them to cover any lawsuits that you may lose. Because I have seen some of the suggestions and they're, well, you know, they're questionable, let me say that.
Mayor Pro Tem Campbell?
I just have one question. What takes precedence, the mineral rights or people's property rights in all of this?
Well, that's it's a little hard to answer briefly, but when it comes to what we call surface rights versus mineral rights, surface rights are the rights you have in the use of the surface of the land. The courts have ruled that the mineral rights are dominant. So the mineral owner has the right to develop those minerals. The surface owner can't prevent them. Now, the surface owner can sometimes impose some reasonable restrictions, and the mineral owner doesn't have the right to just trample the land. If they're going to develop that resource, they have to do it in a responsible and reasonable manner.
You'll be the first group to get our legal analysis when it's available. I was hoping to have it tonight.
I have two questions. One is for Mr. Sabadat. I know that when we looked at our ordinance language, we looked at Rochester Hills. Is it something that you could easily pull up somehow and put it next to ours?
Easily, no.
All right. Wasn't it less restrictive than theirs?
Are you prepared to speak to this, Lori?
It's been some time since I've looked at the Rochester Hills ordinance, but I do believe that it is more restrictive than what we have.
Theirs is more restrictive, ours is less restrictive.
That was my understanding as well.
And I guess I wanted to make sure that our legal department, our attorneys on staff have looked at the Rochester Hills, and I know that we considered that, is this defensible or not, when we proposed it. That was my second question. And I just wanted a confirmation from Mr. Mosney and Ms. Blank. So.
The ordinance is defensible, that's our opinion. And I do want to comment on one thing Mr. Fish said. our ordinance does not prohibit going beyond the property lines. We just put in the ordinance that if you're going to cross over the subsurface property line, there has to be some documentation that you have the right to do so. But our ordinance does not prohibit that.
Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up?
That was it. Thank you very much, Booker.
Again, I'd like to point out that the drilling operation, you have much less rights than you do about the placement of pipes and tanks and things like that. Because, again, pipes leak more per mile travel of oil and gas than trucks do. So about 3 times as much, according to a study I saw a while ago. So you have to make sure that what you're doing, placing piping and that kind of thing is going to be in a place where it won't cause damage if it does leak. If there is some kind of break or problem with it, just make sure that you're watching that. And you have the right to do that.
Councilman Teets?
Yep. So since we just got done with a major settlement on a different case where we were found to be liable, I had a question. If our ordinance was passed tonight, for instance, and the next day we're taking to court, the city would be held liable. Versus if the regulations that currently exist through the state, could the city be sued over those regulations versus a new ordinance that we'd be proposing? Do you understand what I guess I'm looking for some direction, maybe it's an attorney question, but the question is, if we passed an ordinance and it was challenged, we could be sued and have damages assessed to us.
It is possible, and it has been done before, but, again, that's why you're having this forum, is to get the information. That's why you're allowing for all of the inputs to be here.
Right.
If you do something more restrictive than the state,
Yeah.
then yes, there is a possibility that we would get sued, and
Versus whatever the state regulations are, we don't have any sort of liability because that was a decision made in Lansing by, some bureaucrats, no offense to bureaucrats.
If council finds that these state regulations are sufficient to protect the residents, then yes, you would not have to adopt an ordinance because there is some risk.
I just wanted to confirm that one of you 3 gentlemen tonight did say that the area where Troy is located does not naturally lend itself to what hydraulic fracturing companies are looking for. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I made that statement. That, you never can predict absolutely what might be in the future, but the current formations or reservoirs of interest in this part of the state do not lend themselves to hydraulic fracturing. That's actually most of the oil development that's going on, what little there is right now, with low prices, is happening in southeast Michigan. And it's for the Trenton Black River Formation, which is not a candidate for hydraulic fracturing.
And didn't you also indicate when you were speaking that the fracturing that has occurred within the state of Michigan has been safe
That's correct.
thus far?
Yes. Yeah. We've never had
And
a problem
incident-free?
with hydraulic fracturing itself. Some hydraulically fractured wells have had surface spill problems and things, but that's not really connected to the hydraulic fracturing. That could have been a conventional well. You never can rule out, accidents, but we've never had an incident of actual environmental contamination from the hydraulic fracturing operation itself.
And then I just had one question for you. Did I hear you say that when cities and townships and municipalities go to create ordinances where they want to control this hydraulic fracturing, that you were of the opinion that it's best to do it in a much bigger picture as opposed to smaller pieces of the puzzle?
Correct. We have 1,700 local units of government in the state of Michigan, and I would argue that a statewide regulation and regulatory program that requires engineers, attorneys, is best.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of things. When you say there's never been an environmental problem from drilling, 99.9% of wells drilled in Michigan were never tested, any kind of testing before they were drilled, most of them after where they were drilled, so there's no real way of knowing. until very recently, the vast majority of wells were in these parts of Michigan that really had very, very little population. So most of them are out in the woods, they're out hunting, they'll run across one once in a while, just out in the middle of the woods. So with no wells nearby, with no testing before or after, there's no real way of saying that there's never been a problem, because you just don't know. I've always had an issue with that. To me, it's almost dishonest. If you can say that you've tested them all and you've never seen anything, well, that's a statement. But if you said, we don't have any evidence of it, so that's not a statement. You can say that there's none, because if you don't have evidence, that doesn't mean that there's no evidence out there you haven't found. So there's just issues I have around that. In terms of how you can look at that here, just testing and make sure that they do testing before they do wells and after they do wells, and just once in a while check, just to see. If you have a complaint from a person that's somewhere near these kind of drills, just look into it right away. Don't let it hang, don't let it linger, so other people won't find that problem. I just want to make sure that everything's done in the way that's going to protect your citizens the best you can.
I would like to say that's also our goal.
I understand that completely.
The statement on no accident or no incidents of contamination from hydraulic fracturing. Former EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson, she was the first EPA Administrator in the Obama administration, testified in the same case before Congress, and that's over 1 million wells. Secondly, the new rules that Al Shop passed about a year ago or so,
Last
on
March.
hydraulic fracturing last March, requires the baseline water testing, just as an extra precaution.
But my understanding, that's only for the large-scale fracking, not for the small frack. So regular fracking, still don't have it. That was my second question. When you say there's not the right formations for fracking, are you talking about just vertical fracking or the large fracking? Because vertical fracking, they still do here, don't they? I mean,
No.
not in this area. Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Okay, for the sake of trying to get everybody a question, we have about 10 more minutes. And as most of these discussions go, a lot of the questions get asked in the first 10 people, and then the rest don't need it. But if we could just keep in mind, we have about 10 more minutes to go. Councilman Henderson.
My question, Hal, correct?
Yes.
You mentioned 40 acres under lease and 3 acres to drill. Is it, can you explain 40 acres under lease? Is that a company can come in and they have 40 acres throughout Oakland County, or is it specific to a city or an area?
Well, first of all, I'm thinking about it. I redid the numbers. With 450-foot radius, that equates to 14 acres. You're going to have 14 acres with no residences or water wells within it. As far as, let's see, what was the second part of your question?
Well, you had mentioned 40 acres.
40 acres.
Yeah.
No, you have to have a square 40 for the, well, that's in general. For the formations of interest in this part of the state, you can make that up out of 2 adjacent 20s. So, but it's a 40 acre square, more or less, 40 acres more or less.
Okay, the follow-up to that, though, is if we're talking 40 acres, are we talking 40 acres underground in a pool of oil that somebody would drill into?
That's a 40 acre, it's a 40 acre tract over that prospective oil reservoir.
Okay, so you would have to
Maybe a
have...
lot bigger than 40 acres, but if it's bigger than 40 acres, then, and you want to drill another well, you have to have another adjacent or 40 acre parcel on which to drill a well. So that 40 acre, that's determined through geology, drilling engineering to be the size of tract that you can efficiently and economically develop with one well.
So you would have to have leases with all the property owners that preside over that mineral?
You have to have a lease or right to drill on it, with every tract within that 40. Occasionally you get somebody that doesn't agree to lease, and you can, in that case, that's called statutory pooling. If you've got like 35 acres under lease, the owners of those 35 acres want the oil and gas developed, they want the production royalties and so forth. The owner of that 5 acres, they shouldn't be in a position they can deny the owners of that 35. So they can come in and ask for terms under which the owners of that 5 acre would participate in production, even if they don't have a lease. And what they get their full portion of production, just if they own, 1/8 of the reservoir. So, but the operator that did the drilling cannot drill on that 5 acres either. They have to drill on the one of the 35 acres, an area within that 35 acres that they have under lease.
Well, I think the residents in Troy probably, you're putting in a lot of numbers, 40 acres here, 450. They want to know, okay, who owns my mineral rights? Do I own them? If not, how do I get them so that I can make a decision to lease it now or later?
That will generally be in the records in the Register of Deeds office. If somebody has reserved the minerals or somebody has sold the mineral rights under that parcel at some point, that'll be in the deed.
At the county? At the county?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ali?
My question is for Mr. Fitch. Historically, since the 1980s, Michigan has had several tens of thousands of wells. Do you have any information about proportionately how many of those are vertical and how many of those are actually horizontal wells? And out of the horizontal, which ones are about what percentage are actually in urban areas?
I'd have to go back and I can dig the figures out, but I don't have them at my fingertips. We've had more than 1,800 wells drilled within cities or villages, I can tell you that. As far as proportion, horizontal wells, horizontal drilling started back in around 1980. It's more the exception than the rule. We haven't had a lot of horizontal wells. One thing that they do though, if you can drill a horizontal well, you really restrict the number of wells, surface locations that you need, because you can reach out a long ways in multiple directions. So it's really, from that perspective, it's less impact on the environment. But, I could get those numbers for you if you'd like, and get back with you.
As a planning commission, we look at our ordinance and we look at the surface of the city. And we have zoning districts that are based on the surface. And all three of you gentlemen said we're in danger because we've somewhat limited where the fracking can go, or the drilling can go. Now, that's based on zoning ordinance. How do we know as a community where the oil companies may want to drill? Or where there's, I'm trying to make a connection so that we're not necessarily, limiting their rights, their property rights. But on the other hand, how do you know?
Well, you don't know until you actually drill that bit down. The first thing the company does, they'll have to put together enough acreage in leases to make at least a 40-acre block, and usually a lot more than that. And then they'll run a seismic survey across there, send sound waves down, and see what kind of reflection they get. But they really don't know at that point. Even after they have some good seismic information, maybe every one in every 3 wells or so is successful. So the drill bit is really telling the story there. And if I could tell you where it's I would have done something else.
Councilman Godley?
Just real quick, has there been one instance of hydraulic fracking in Oakland County up to this point?
I do not believe so.
Thank you.
Don't hold me to that, but I'm going to say more than 90% sure.
Mr. Griffin?
Real quick on the, kind of the right to know. Every permit application is on their website. You can by county, and they have a treasure trove of information on the DEQ's website. So
I've seen, and we do, when we get an application permit too, we're, in certain townships, certain sizes, we are required by law to notify the township supervisor. We do it as a matter of policy. We notify the mayor or the township supervisor, whatever the local municipality is. We give a notice when we get a permit application. And that's your local government opportunity to comment if you think you have some information that would be helpful to the decision making. And if if there's a significant concern, we'll come down for a meeting with you, or a public meeting, or whatever you might feel would be helpful.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask, actually, ask Hal a question myself. I heard him a while ago on NPR say that when the oil companies are doing their actual development work, they're free from the Freedom of Information Act, and a lot of that can be secret. Is that what you said? Because I think I remember that, but I might be wrong.
There are certain confidentiality provisions in law. The well site and the location of the well and so forth is not confidential. That's that's open for public, that's open for public information. The formation tops, where they hit those formations and the character of those formations can be held confidential for up to 90 days. So, but there's no confidentiality for the location, the whole drilling program, how that was constructed, everything else.
I don't have any questions. In view of the time limitations, sometime maybe I'd like to comment on some of my observations, but I don't have a question there.
Thank you. We are not governed to be done at 7 o'clock. I think this is an important discussion for us, so I can see us going to 7:10 or 7:15 tonight. So if you have a question.
Well, maybe an observation, not a question. We've been proactive on this because there's a possibility, even though it's geologically apparently not conducive to fracking. If that's true, what harm is going to be suffered if we enact an ordinance? What if someone doesn't believe the assumption of the American Petroleum Institute and say, you know what, I am going to drill in Troy? We haven't got an ordinance. The state statute is a general statute. Our ordinance fills in gaps that the state does not have concerning noise pollution, the amount of liquids, waste liquids that may be returned to the surface when the fracturing is done, some of those concerns. And I think Mr. Nash was correct. We're talking about safety here and trying to keep it so that the community is safe. Maybe drilling will never take place, but what's the harm in having an ordinance in place in case it does?
Thank you. Could I comment on that?
But let's wait till the end. I don't think that was a question. I think it was more of an observation. So we're all going to have our own opinions, I think, as we move forward. Councilman Pennington.
Just got a quick question. It's been a hot button topic, and in the news you hear about horizontal fracturing is the major issue. There's been drilling and horizontal drilling in Michigan for many decades. Now the question is fracturing and then a horizontal fracturing. And now I'm just curious, is there a case in Michigan in the northern upper peninsula or the northern lower peninsula or the upper peninsula where they have been doing any type of horizontal fracturing? Because that seems to be the problems where there are water table problems and problems with the environment.
We have had some. We've had some horizontal wells that are hydraulically fractured. Hydraulic fracturing is a generally one-time process that's done after the well is drilled and constructed. But and some wells can be drilled horizontally and not hydraulically fractured, and vice versa. You have vertical wells that are hydraulically fractured or not. So hydraulic fracturing itself is a distinct part of the operation. It's usually just a one-time operation right immediately after the well is drilled. So yeah, we've had about 80 high-volume hydraulic fracturing operations in Michigan. Those are operations that use more than 100,000 gallons of water. We've had, well, I'm kind of searching my memory now. We've had, I'm going to go back to about the last 7 or 8 years. We've had about 15, I think, high-volume horizontal wells that have been big-scale fracturing operations.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not sure who specifically said that, and it might have been comments from two different folks, but I heard two numbers about litigation, like risk or settlement. I think one was $90 million, and one was something like $800,000.
That was the Farmington Hills case.
And I was trying to understand the difference between those two, just at a high level, different scenarios.
I don't know enough about the other case to tell you.
Well, I do know about both cases. The $90 million settlement was over by the Ludington area. They were what we call Niagara Reef pinnacle prospects. They're fairly prolific, and there were multiple targets. So there was quite a bit more prospective value there. The Farmington Hills situation was a one-well prospect. The well, incidentally, was eventually drilled from a different surface location, and it did cost the operator significantly more money to they had to drill a lot longer horizontal, but they did drill a well, and they did reach their target. So there was less ultimate damage to the operator in the Farmington Hills case, and less potential, probably smaller potential reserves there of the well.
So it's related to the opportunity of the drilling company. So,
Right.
and then
Right.
we've said that Troy doesn't really lend itself to that large-scale development. Is that what we said earlier? In terms of the opportunity.
I guess, as I said, I really can't tell you what my potential is for Troy. One of these wells in this formation that is of interest in this part of the state can produce up to a maximum allowable production rate of 200 barrels of oil a day. You can do the math. 200 barrels, I think oil's going for $40 a barrel. So what's that, $8,000 in revenue a day? Over, you can extend that over a time period and kind of get an idea of the potential value there is.
Thank you.
Can I say something quick? It was mentioned before that it's the inevitability, we have to have this gas and oil, we just have to have it, and we're not gonna have enough alternative energy sources. My city hall, we redid the whole city hall, and we went from $35,000 a year natural gas to zero. We have geothermal heating now. One of my wastewater treatment plants, we put in a system to pull the heat out of the sewage retreat, and now we're going to save $50,000 a year in natural gas, going from 50,000 to zero. So there's huge potential for changing the way we're doing things. I'm getting a solar array put in my house, hopefully at the end of the month here. So there's a lot of people are moving very rapidly. The agency that tracks the rate of change in the energy usage there's been complaints about that for many years, that they discount the ability to change to new forms of energy. And my office is looking at ways to do that. I know that Detroit is doing it. Every government that I've run across, that I've talked to, has in some way looked at how to do these things. It's all part of energy efficiency, and the way we can do it is long-term, save natural gas.
Okay, we're getting close, so we do need to start wrapping this up. I'm sorry about us here at the end, but...
My questions have been asked.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
I just want to say I appreciate our speakers coming tonight, and I think it's been very insightful for me, and I think it has been for the Planning Commission and everyone involved. From my personal standpoint, I'm anxious to see the legal documents that could be produced by Mr. Griffin, and if there's somebody from Flow that has the same information, I think that would be beneficial to all of us and our city attorney and the staff. So we can have a short discussion if anyone needs to talk about it, but I think what I've taken from this is that we need more discussion, and we certainly aren't ready, I don't think, to vote on an ordinance change at this point. And we're looking for some direction after this meeting tonight. And in my personal opinion, I think, and we'll see how the council feels here, but I think this needs to go back to the Planning Commission for further discussion, further review. And if we need another joint study session, I am more than happy to do that too. But at least from my perspective, I think it needs to go back.
Fair. If I might just comment on that, I think it would really be helpful, I know we have a really proficient city clerk here, if all three of the speakers could be provided a tape, and then you send in written comments about all of our questions. You know, a lot of us, we're not good note takers, and sometimes we just only have to get summaries of the meetings. I think if they could actually see those, and then you take the time to respond, that will go a long way to help the Planning Commission make perhaps another run at this. I don't know how my fellow Planning Commissioners feel about this, but I don't have a problem with, postponing this to a fairly, sometime in November or December. I think that would be good. But I don't know how the rest of the Planning Commissioners feel about that.
Well, myself personally, my understanding, the reason that we brought the whole fracking issue to the table was out of a desire to protect the citizens of Troy. I mean, it was really to make sure that our city was not taken by surprise and unprepared should someone want to come into Troy and do this sort of natural resource drilling. So, you know, I don't know how long it takes us to get it right, but I think that we need to get it right. I mean, if our goal is to make sure that Troy is protected, that's what we need to do.
Agree. And just related to that, I heard Mr., I believe it was the first speaker, Mr. Fitch, was the city of, or the township of Shelby Township, they were notified when this well went in, exploratory well?
Yes.
See, that one didn't come out in the media at all.
They didn't particularly want to.
Right. Okay, thank you for clarifying that, I appreciate that.
And if the planning commission wants to invite some of the speakers back to be part of further discussion, I just think it kind of needs to go back a little bit now that we've all been educated and we've all gotten some additional information to start. You know, there are many things that come up. Once they come up, we realize that we need to talk more about it before we make a decision, and I think this is one of them. So if there's consensus around the table to send this back and have some further discussion within the planning commission before it ever comes back to the city council, Councilman Teets.
I would just urge the planning commission to pay attention that there are about 2.75 votes of the experts that said this was prohibitive zoning, and it is a grave concern. Even the gentleman that would like to ban all drilling and have us ride bicycles everywhere, would said that it was also concerned about prohibitive issues, and so I'm very concerned. I really just urge you to pay attention to those facts.
I think we've got a great planning commission, and I think they understand what they heard tonight, and I think it just needs further discussion. With that, is there anyone else that wishes to say anything before I let the public?
Can I speak?
Please, hold on. Is there anyone here before I ask the public if they want to speak?
I'd just like to make sure that Mr. Griffin gets that. You said you have a report that's coming out of the rights. If you can get that to Lori, it'd be very, maybe very important to find out who owns what and when and how.
I could send everything to Brian, is that okay?
Yeah, he's okay. He has loose.
And honestly, if Mr. Nash has some legal documents or some documents that you would think would be helpful.
Sure, I can forward that to you. Anytime, anything I can ever do for your community, let me know. This guy here can get hold of me anytime.
Okay, I will call on Jeanette Moore, our first speaker. And if you could come to the microphone, please, and we have 5 minutes.
Okay. So I'm a
But
Troy.
we have 5 minutes total.
I'm a Troy resident, and I have great concerns over fracking. Just the fact that I'd say there's about 4 or 5 countries that have banned it: Germany, France, I can't remember all the names of them, New York, California, most of the communities, they have statewide bans on hydraulic fracking. There are reasons, and some of my concerns are the well casings, as far as has researched, are made from cement. And is it not true that eventually cement does degrade, and then therefore more methane gas has the potential to be released? Of course, you're doing these testings on it now and immediately, but what about long-term? Have there been long-term studies on when these cement casings break down, is more methane gas allowed to escape into the air, which is 25 times more toxic than carbon dioxide? So another issue is how would the disposal of the waste frac fluid be handled? Can anybody answer that?
With our rules that we have here, this is just your opportunity to comment.
Okay. Well, my concern is that, there's been a track record of spills done all over the place by, the gas industry, treatment centers which cannot handle the 700 chemicals that are in fracking fluid. Many of them carcinogenic and many of them, very toxic. So I have that concern. So I just have very many concerns. I have some literature I'd love to
If
give
you
the
could
board.
get that to the city clerk, she will distribute that to all of us.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay, great. And I don't like to speak in public, so I'm sorry.
Oh, you did great. David Riley, if you could, Mr. Riley, just a couple minutes.
I appreciate this chance to speak to you. As an engineer for over 35 years in aerospace, I'm a numbers guy. Certainly there are environmental issues. I'm going to speak to some financial issues. Quicken Loans is on record for having denied mortgages that are next to drilling sites. Numbers of property appreciation vary from 3%, 14%, even as high as 22%. So the drill is there, the trucks are gone, you're left with the mechanics of the pumping station. Long-term down the road, you're still going to have lower property values, and it equates to lower property taxes. So I think, with 800,000 lawsuit in Farmington Hills, I think you have to consider what's the other side of that coin. What's your property value going to be in the long term? 10 years, 20 years, you still have a site that's potentially turned down by mortgage companies and potentially toxic, and could really turn bad, like as you mentioned, when the concrete starts to fail. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Marla Wills?
How much time do I have, like 30 seconds?
No, I'll give you the 2 minutes that I
Okay, well, actually, they
Could you
covered
use
it.
the microphone, please?
Yes, they covered it all pretty much. So with the limited time, I guess, my thought is, on top of what they said, like they said, the Titanic's unsinkable, supposedly. So I'm wondering, this is supposedly safe, there's no, like, real dangers, there's not going to be, I don't know, there might be spills, I heard someone say it. There might be spills. I don't know, Michigan, we get cold weather, so I wonder, is it possible for pipes to freeze? I think it is. And if they freeze, they could leak. And the same thing with the noise pollution, the smell. Just, I think about wear and tear on our roads. We're having these heavy trucks. I don't know how much they weigh, but I believe they have to weigh a lot. And I can just imagine if there's a car accident with one. I wonder, I'm not very familiar with our Troy City Emergency Response Team, but I hope there'd be a lot of transparency with the community as to what our emergency response plan will be if something were to happen, so we could evacuate or let me know. Maybe I'll sell before this happens.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak this evening? Thank you. Once again, thanks to everyone for coming tonight, and especially to our speakers for taking the time to come here. Certainly appreciate it. We are adjourned.